it's Shari here today, and today I'm making this beautiful autumn card with my favorite stamp set, which is Happy Harvest. I try to make a card with this cute scarecrow every year, and I have not this year, so I thought before I jumped straight into Christmas cards, I would make a final fall card with this cute little guy. So I'm going to make a slimline card, so I started by cutting a piece of smooth surface Bristol cardstock with the largest slimline stitched rectangle, and I'm going to be doing some ink blending to make a beautiful autumn sky with these beautiful warm colors. So I've started out with scattered straw there towards the bottom. That's the first color I've applied. And then next I'm going in with wild honey. And I'm just putting some down, and then I'll go back to that lighter color and blend out the line between the two colors so that you get a nice blend between them and you don't get a harsh line. The next color I'm going to bring in is Rusty Hinge. I couldn't decide if I wanted to do Rusty Hinge or Carved Pumpkin. I felt like Carved Pumpkin was a little too bright for the look that I'm going with here. So I'm just putting down a layer of that Rusty Hinge. I'm leaving some towards the top because I'm going to do a fourth color on the top. Since this is a tall card, I have space to do 4 colors and get a really nice gradient from that lighter yellow to a darker reddish orange. And then the last color I'm using here is Crackling Campfire. So I'm just using that towards the top, darkening it up. I'm going to use a piece of paper to protect my paper where I'm holding it. I've been using Bristol cardstock because I feel like the ink moves around a little bit more on that before absorbing into the paper, and sometimes it will leave some fingerprints if you are not careful. So you can just use a piece of scrap cardstock like I have here, and that will eliminate that problem. Now I've got some clean water in a spray bottle, and I'm just going to spritz it all over to give it a little bit of texture. I've done this a lot with oxides, but it also works great with the regular inks. And then I'm going to hit it with my heat tool to dry it faster so that I don't get too much mixing of the color. Because what I really wanted was just some texture to this background, not my colors mixing around and kind of creating that marbling effect. So I'm going to hit it with the heat tool so that that dries a lot faster and I don't get that problem. If that's the look you're going for, go for it, but that is not the look that I wanted on this particular background. Also, by drying it, I can see what that texture looks like, and I can add some more water if I need to, but this looks pretty good. So I'm going to add just a little bit of sparkle to the background with some gold watercolor splatters like I always do. And I'm using the yellow gold on this one. I felt like that color went better with the colors that I used on the background. So I'm just getting it nice and soupy there. I'm going to pick it up with my paintbrush, and then I'm going to tap my paintbrush to get big splatters. And then I'm going to flick it off the side of a clear block to get some small splatters. And it will give this nice sparkly look to the background. You can see when the light hits it. So now for the ground, I've cut just a scrap piece of Cilantro cardstock with that same large slimline stitch rectangle. This is going to go along the bottom, and I'm using one of the Grassy Hillsides just to cut the top of it. I'm going to go in with some peeled paint distress ink and a blending brush to just hit the top of that grass with a little bit of ink and define it a little bit more. So I'm not going to pull that ink all the way to the bottom. It's just going to go along the top, and you can see you get the nice contrast between the grass and the sky. Now for my little scarecrow. He is my favorite stamp, and I have neglected him this year. So it's time to put him on a card, and he's the only image I'm going to put on this card. I'm keeping it pretty simple. So I'm just going to color in his overalls. I like to color his overalls like they're blue jeans. So I'm using a B23 here, and then I'm going to go in with a B26 and add a little bit of shadow. So I'm just going to add a little bit of shadow at the top and the bottom under the pocket, and then I'll just blend that out back with that B23. And then the pocket was kind of bright, so I decided to go in with that darker blue and just color the whole pocket so it looks a little bit different. For his hat, I'm going to start with a darker YR27, and then I'll bring in a lighter color to make his It's sort of a straw hat, but it's a little bit darker. I didn't want to do traditional kind of brighter yellowy browns for a straw hat because the background right behind his hat is about that same color. So that's why I'm going in with sort of the darker browns or yellow browns. So for the buttons or the snaps on his overalls, I'm just going to color those in a gray color. And then for the ribbon that's across his hat, I decided to pull in a darker red that's sort of like what's at the top of the background I created and color that ribbon in a red color. Now for the straw that is his hair and at the ends of his arms and his legs, I'm just using a yellow, and then I'll go in with a darker yellow and just add a dot of darker right where it comes out from under the hat or out of the cuffs of the pants or the sleeves. Now for his face, I wanted to give it that sort of burlap look, that dark burlap, well, it's not too dark, but a dark burlap look. So I'm actually going in with some light YRs to start with to give it a base. Then I went in with a slightly darker one to give it some shadow. And then now I'm going to pull in an E31 at the top and just bring it down a little bit. So he's lighter towards the bottom and darker towards his hat. And that kind of gives it that taupey, burlappy look. I'm just going to do some orange for his nose. And then I'm going to color his shirt green because I want it to contrast with all these warm colors I have on the background. And I'm not going to do any shading on the shirt, but I am going to embellish this little guy a little bit with some other little designs. So I have this really fine Copic fine liner. This is the smallest one, the 0.03. And what I like to do on his hat is just add some little hash marks, basically, some cross hatching to kind of give it the look of a straw hat. So it's kind of hard to see if you can see there that just that little fine cross hatching just gives it some texture and makes it look a little less flat. And I decided to add some little rosy cheeks to him, so I'm going in with a really pale pink, and I just kind of pushed that color away by using that. Now I'm going to go in with the slightly darker one, right where I made those little cheeks. And then I'll go back with the light one to just kind of lighten that up a little bit and blend it out. And then now I can add the details. So I'm going to give him sort of a plaid shirt. So I've got a white gel pen here, and I'm just going to do some stripes down his arms first. And then in the middle, and then I'm going to do the horizontal one. So his arms are pretty thin, but I'm going to do a stripe, and I'm going to try and make it not quite down the center, just a little bit towards the top, and then a couple on the body. And now he has a fun green plaid shirt. And then I'm also going to add a couple other white details to his hat and his pants around the curve on that pocket. A few little shine marks on the buttons on his pants. And then I added some little dots to his cheeks. So here is our cute little finished scarecrow. And now I'm going to work on the sentiment. So if you remember back in the summer when I did all those cards with the fun custom sentiments, I am going to do the same thing on this card today. So I'm putting it in my MISTI just to kind of get the placement, and I'm going to use Riley's ABCs mixed with Smitty's ABCs. So I'm going to start with Riley's, and I'm going to start with my word at the very bottom so that I know my spacing is going to be correct, and then I'm going to work from the bottom up. So this word is the word beautiful. So I'm just sort of centering it up above him, and then I'll close the door of my MISTI and pick it up. And I'm using all capital letters on this one, which means I'm going to have to, excuse my head, I'm making sure it's straight. I'm going to have to move the U over, so that is what you saw me doing there. I moved the U over so that I could put the L at the end. And I'm also going to be embossing this. So I'm going to add some of my anti-static powder tool to this background. This background is nice and dry, but this keeps that embossing powder from sticking to any moisture that might still be there. So I'm going to remove my pieces there that I don't need for placement anymore because I've got it on my MISTI door. I'm going to get out my clear embossing powder because I'm going to do some black embossing. So this is how I like to do black embossed images and words. I stamp with VersaFine ink, which is a oil-based pigment ink that is black, and then I put clear embossing over it. To me, this gives a much crisper, cleaner black embossed image than using black embossing powder. So I'm just going to ink up that word, stamp it down, and then I'm going to grab the U and I'm just going to put it on a small block and fill in that space that I left for the U. Now I can add my clear embossing powder, and it's just going to stick to that black pigment ink. And then I'm going to go ahead and melt this so that I don't run the risk of knocking off any of that embossing powder. So for the words above it, I've gone ahead and I've put them on a block using Smitty's ABCs. You could use your MISTI again, but now that I have that first word there, I have my placement and I don't really need it, but use whatever you're comfortable with. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm inking it up with that VersaFine ink, and I'm going to add that clear embossing to it. And luckily for this one, I actually didn't have to reuse any of the letters. There was a plenty in the set to spell out all 3 lines so I could stamp them all at once. And then finally, the first word of this sentiment is the word autumn, and I'm going to do the same as I did with beautiful. Stamp that out and then stamp the U a second time because I only have one capital U. And I love this sentiment that I found on the internet that says, autumn is proof that change is beautiful. Autumn is one of my favorite times of year, and I do think it is one of the most beautiful times of year when all the leaves change and they're all so pretty. But I also feel like it is a nice encouraging sentiment to let someone know that it's okay to change. I don't like change, but change can be a good thing. So I'm just putting it on a slimline card that's 3.5 by 8.5. I'm going to put some foam tape on the back of my grass that goes along the bottom just so it's popped up with a little bit of dimension. Line that up towards the bottom, and then I've put some little foam squares on the back of my scarecrow. And like I said, he is the only image in this. I wanted to keep it simple. That beautiful background is sort of the focal point, and then he's so cute in his little plaid shirt. I didn't even add any of the little crows, which I had actually thought about in the beginning. And then finally, there are 2 little leaves in this set. They're solid, and I'm going to stamp those with some barn door Distress OXIDE ink. So the OXIDE ink is a pigment ink, and it's going to set on top of this background. I'm just going to sprinkle those around, and I like how you can see them very well at the bottom in that yellow, and then they sort of fade away and kind of match tone on tone at that top with that crackling campfire color. So even the leaves sort of go with the gradient, which I just think is fun. And then here is that finished card with that cute little scarecrow and that beautiful background and that custom sentiment. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.